19th of May 2016. EgyptAir Flight 804 vanished from radar over the Mediterranean at 37,000 feet. All 66 souls on board just disappeared within seconds. The investigation ran for 8 long years but only discovered silence, contradictions, and cover-ups. Egypt insisted it was terrorism. France insisted it was a fire. And then, without any clear answer, updates just stopped. But what really happened? And why the truth about this plane may never come out? This is the tragic untold story of EgyptAir Flight 804. And in this video, we'll retrace how a crash that should have had answers turned into one of aviation's most unsettling mysteries. Nineteenth of May 2016. At 2:25 in the morning, the Athens Area Control Center, known by its call sign Athena, woke up with radio chatter. Controllers on the overnight shift were guiding planes across Greece and the Mediterranean. Flights moved smoothly from one airspace to the next. Amidst them, near the bottom of one radar screen, EgyptAir Flight 804 approached the handoff point to Cairo. The controller called it for transfer and said, "EgyptAir 804, contact Cairo 124.7, bye-bye." After that, 11 seconds passed. The controller made another call, but still no answer came. The controller took 4 more attempts. The plane was still on radar, still at 37,000 feet, still heading straight, but no one was answering. Being worried, Athena called Cairo. Cairo Control also said that the plane wasn't with them. Calls went out on the emergency frequency. Nearby planes tried to reach it. Still no response. And suddenly, instead of giving any response, the flight disappeared from the radar. No distress call, no change in altitude, no emergency code. Just vanished in the sky. Within 3 minutes, controllers informed the Greek Air Force. By 2:48, the aircraft, an Airbus A320, carrying 66 people, was officially declared missing. Egypt's Aircraft Accident Investigation Directorate, called EAAID, was now in charge. France and America, which made the plane and its engines, were invited too, along with Airbus and Europe's Aviation Safety Agency. What little was known at first was simple. Flight 804 left Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport at 21:21 UTC, headed for Cairo. On board were 56 passengers assisted by 10 crew. The crew included 2 pilots, 5 flight attendants, and 3 security officers to handle the hijackings. The Airbus climbed to more than 37,000 feet. The night was calm. In the cockpit, 25-year-old First Officer Mohammed Hassan flew the plane. 36-year-old Captain Mohammed Shukayr monitored the instruments. Their voices were relaxed. They talked, ate dinner, and asked for blankets. Light music played softly in the background. It was a routine flight on a routine path, so the disappearance of it was extremely unlikely. But soon, ships found their floating wreckage and human remains near the last known position. The debris was shredded, suggesting a high-speed impact. But the first real clue came not from the sea, but from Cairo. The aircraft had actually been sending messages through a system called ACARS. A CARS is like text messaging between a plane and its airline's maintenance team. It can also send automatic fault warnings. EgyptAir's office received a series of alarming signals minutes before the crash. It started at 2:26 local time with a lavatory smoke warning. Then, one by one, faults in cockpit window systems, smoke in the avionics bay, failures in flight control computers. It was a series of problems at the only common point. They all drew power from one panel on the right side of the cockpit. Based on this clue to the investigators, this was a strong sign of fire. But was the fire the cause or just a symptom of something else? In the first day after the crash, many feared a bomb. The reason? Just 7 months earlier, terrorists had destroyed a Russian jet that was leaving Egypt, and that killed 224. Flight 804's sudden disappearance looked similar, but the evidence didn't support that idea. Greek data showed the plane did not explode at altitude. The plane's transponder stopped working, but the old-style radar, which follows the raw signals, showed the plane turning in a spiral to the right for 9 minutes. At the same time, around 2:36, an emergency beacon on the plane sent out a signal. That beacon only goes off when the plane slows down suddenly, which usually means it has crashed. But the mysterious part was, in this plane, that beacon went off before the final impact. Why? No one could explain. All it proved was that the plane stayed whole for longer than anyone thought. The only way forward was to find the black boxes. French investigators defined a search area. A ship called Laplace picked up faint pings from the recorders. On June 14th, another vessel, the John Lethbridge, found the wreckage on the seabed, 3,000 meters deep, nearly as deep as the Titanic. Both recorders were recovered, but they were damaged. The French team repaired it, restored the data and downloaded it, and then sent it back to Egypt. But later, one French newspaper claimed Egypt ordered the French to delete all copies of the recordings. By law, under international rules, Egypt indeed had the power to control who kept the data. An investigator even said the French destroyed their copies. But that turned out not to be fully true, but the tension between the two countries was real. However, what's important is what story the recorders told. The cockpit voice recorder confirmed a fire broke out, and the data showed system failures matching the ACARS messages. From the wreckage, deep-sea robots lifted pieces of the fuselage. One section from below the right forward door showed charring and soot. Another from the galley ceiling area showed fire damage. This means a fire really broke out on the right side of the cockpit. But what had sparked it? Some suspected faulty wiring, others a battery device like a phone. In public, people leaned toward an accident, but in private, another idea was growing. In September, French paper Le Figaro reported that traces of TNT explosive were found on victim remains. French investigators even wanted to check for contamination, but Egyptian authorities blocked them. The remains were packed in Egyptian-supplied bags, their origins unclear. France refused to sign a joint report confirming explosives. In December, Egypt went ahead anyway. They announced TNT had been detected and launched a criminal investigation. Under Egyptian law, that meant prosecutors, not accident investigators, would now lead. Once prosecutors took over, the French lost their guaranteed role, and the case started slipping into secrecy. By then, the French doubted the explosive claims, but Egypt pushed the terrorist theory forward. So did a hidden fire cripple the plane, or was there an unseen hand behind its fall? For a long time, it remained a mystery. By the end of December 2016, there were no new updates from Egypt. From then on, nearly all new information came from Europe. Finally, in May 2017, a small but important detail surfaced. A source close to the case said French forensic experts didn't find any traces of explosives on the passengers. In 2018, French courts asked for the recordings and found out the BEA still had a backup, even though it had said they were erased. Then, in a shocking step, French police raided the BEA office to take the data. With it, French investigators made a secret report. And the next year, the report leaked. It said a fire, likely fed by leaking oxygen, might have brought the plane down. It also noted earlier problems like faulty smoke detectors and air conditioning, which ACARS had reported but were not written in the logbook. The report also guessed that passengers moved to the back to escape smoke, but there was no proof for that. And it raised doubts about earlier claims that traces of TNT explosive were found on the victims. Since the bodies had been underwater for weeks, experts believed any traces should have dissolved. Investigators thought oxygen may have leaked from a cockpit mask because of a wrong setting. In that situation, if a pilot lit a cigarette, it could have sparked a fire. EgyptAir pilots were known to smoke so much that the airline had to keep replacing cockpit ashtrays. But no one could prove the crash pilots smoked that night. Still, the theory exploded across headlines, but one fact stood out: no final report was coming and Egypt stayed silent. 6 years had already passed, and normally it takes 1, maybe 3 years. Behind the scenes, the French BEA had been pressing Egypt to release a report. But when nothing happened, they took matters into their own hands. In 2023, they began experiments with the fragments Egypt had shared. And by October, they sent Egypt the results. Pressure was mounting. By mid-2024, the deadlock finally cracked. Egypt finally let the EAAID draft a report. The BEA got a copy by July 31st and gave feedback. Egypt responded. This back and forth dragged on until October 30th, when Egypt suddenly dropped its final report. 8.5 years after the crash, the silence broke, but relief turned to shock. Egypt's report said a bomb hidden in the galley tore the plane apart. So again, it became terrorism versus accident. Two official accounts, side by side, telling two different stories. Families who had waited nearly a decade were left with no closure. The public was left confused. The truth was still far away. The Egyptian investigators claimed that at midnight, after 25 minutes the pilots had dinner, everything changed. At that exact moment, a bomb hidden in the front galley exploded. To understand the Egyptian version, we must rewind back and look. Egypt's skies were already unsafe. Terror groups, including the Islamic State, were active. Just months earlier, in October 2015, a Russian passenger jet had exploded over Sinai. In March 2016, barely 2 months before Flight 804, an EgyptAir plane was hijacked and forced to land in Cyprus. No one died, but it was a warning. Because of such threats, 3 security officers were placed on Flight 804, but no one expected what came next. When the wreckage was pulled from the Mediterranean, Egyptian investigators thought they saw signs of an explosion. A catering trolley was found twisted and flattened. A passenger door was bent outward. To them, these were marks of a bomb. They argued that a passenger could have hidden the device in a food trolley. When it went off, fire spread, the plane was lost, and all 66 died. But their reasoning had loopholes, and as I said, the traces of TNT came from bodies that had been underwater for weeks. Science says explosive residue dissolves in seawater after 2 days. So how did it survive a month? Naturally, the French said the evidence was tainted, likely contaminated during recovery. Even stranger, the victims who tested positive for TNT were not near the galley. They were scattered throughout the plane. Even those closest to the supposed blast site tested negative. So the Egyptian case did not add up. Now let's discuss the French version. They examined the black boxes more closely. The first odd sound on the recorder was a hiss. The means oxygen escaping. Oxygen itself doesn't burn, but it makes fire explode into life. The leak, as the investigators said, came from the first officer's mask. Days earlier, that mask had been removed for servicing. Did a mistake cause the leak? Seconds later, the pilots shouted one word: fire. But no smoke alarms came from the toilets, no warning from the galley. Clearly, flames were right in front of them. And to the French, the fire began here near the 120 VU panel and raced through the cockpit. The wreckage also proved it. Cockpit pieces blackened, wires melted, classic fire scars, not an explosion. The recorder gave no sound of a blast, and if we see the past bombings, the sound of explosions always roared on tape. But here, there was only crackling, alarms, panic. The plane never lost pressure either. Plus, a bomb would have ripped the fuselage open. Alarms would have screamed, but nothing happened. For 4 long minutes after the supposed blast, the aircraft stayed sealed, fighting to live. So how could it be a bomb explosion? If we don't know the truth, that's a big problem. Because if it was a bomb, the threat is people. If it was fire, the threat is the machine. Without pinpointing the reason, this could happen again and again. There was another solid reason, which is why the French leaned on the fire theory. First, the cockpit recorder gave the clue, as I said. At 25 minutes past midnight, a hiss lasted 2.5 seconds. It was oxygen from the first officer's mask system. But the major point was that this plane's oxygen system already had a troubled history. Days earlier, the first officer's mask box had been replaced with one removed from another plane for faults. The oxygen cylinder had also been replaced and other parts repaired. Egypt said the system was fine. The French disagreed. The audio showed the first officer's mask microphone was live for at least 30 minutes. This means his valve had been open since Paris. When he pressed the emergency knob, the hiss turned into a continuous roar. Then came a pop from the mask box. Lab tests matched this to a ruptured oxygen hose ignited by flame. Past accidents showed the same pattern. Oxygen leaks plus sparks equal disaster. But how the spark really started here was never found. So the way the investigation turned out, only the deceased 66 people could tell us what happened to them in their final minutes. We can only visualize what they most likely have gone through. That night, after the pilots had already finished their in-flight tasks, and there was little to do but wait for the descent into Cairo. Captain Shuker was feeling cold and asked for a blanket. The flight attendant came in, clarified what he wanted, and handed him both a blanket and a pillow. The captain seemed ready to rest while the young first officer, Mohammed Assem, remained at the controls. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The voices of Athens air traffic control filled the background, guiding other planes through the night sky. Music played faintly in the cockpit. The atmosphere was calm, but then the first officer noticed something strange. As he reached for a map or a chart, he heard muffled noises echoing through his loudspeaker. That only happens when the microphone of an oxygen mask is active. But it wasn't supposed to be. He realized something was wrong. The oxygen mask might not have been properly reset. He thought of telling the captain, but decided not to wake him. He chose instead to test it quietly. He pressed the emergency knob to check if oxygen was flowing. The sound came instantly, a hiss. That wasn't normal. The mask shouldn't have been releasing oxygen at all. But at that exact moment, a hidden danger was triggered. Inside the oxygen system, a short circuit created a tiny spark. The oxygen tube, filled with flammable material, burst into flames within a split second, and the quiet cockpit turned into a nightmare in a flash. Fire exploded out of the oxygen mask box. Flames shot upward, unstoppable. Assam screamed, "Fire! Fire!" Captain Shukair and the flight attendant saw it too. Panic gripped the cockpit. The captain shouted for an extinguisher, but the one closest to them was already surrounded by fire. The flight attendant rushed out to get another extinguisher from the galley, but smoke followed her into the cabin. The captain yelled to close the door, but it was already too late. Smoke spread fast, seeping into the lavatories and the galley. The alarm blared as detectors picked up the fumes. Passengers must have started to smell the fire by then, though none of their voices were ever heard. The fire forced the first officer out of his seat. He stumbled away, his clothes singed. Captain Shukair may have stayed behind trying to keep control of the aircraft, or he may have left to find better gear to fight the flames. Nobody knows for sure. The voice recorder only caught fragments of the chaos, coughing, shouting, and the shrill alarms that never stopped. In the meantime, Athens' controllers called out asking EgyptAir 804 to switch to Cairo control. The words filled the cockpit but went unanswered. More calls followed. The fire kept growing, feeding on oxygen, the one thing every human needs but which in that moment turned into the plane's greatest enemy. Someone's breathing was heard, heavy and ragged. Then came a final thud. And then a voice, faint and broken, whispered the last chilling words of the flight, "I ask forgiveness from God." By that time, 3 minutes and 12 seconds had passed since the fire began. After that, there were no more human sounds. The plane became what investigators later called a ghost flight. Still, the systems on board kept working for a short while. But one by one, they started to fail. Smoke reached the electrical panels. Computers began shutting down, and within seconds, the autopilot disconnected. And there's no one to take over. Alarms rang. Objects clattered to the floor. Then both the voice and data recorders cut out. And 3 seconds later, the radar screen went blank. EgyptAir Flight 804 had vanished forever. What happened after the recorders went silent is left to imagination. The plane was burning from within. Most likely, the fire tore through the cockpit door and attacked the cabin. Passengers might have rushed toward the back, choking on smoke. Some might have grabbed life jackets, hoping against hope for a water landing. Or maybe the fire was too fast and maybe they never had the chance. The aircraft began to spiral downward, tighter and tighter circles, like a black hole pulling it in. For 9 long minutes, it descended before slamming into the Mediterranean Sea. The result? No one survived. The cylinder emptied too fast. Other A320s also showed leaks, and EgyptAir withheld key maintenance records. Electrical faults or crew error were also possible. The report warned that oxygen-fed fires cannot be fought with standard extinguishers. Crews need better training, safer systems, and a ban on cockpit smoking. But Egypt delayed for years, protecting its image while families of 66 victims waited. The real cause is still disputed. What is certain, oxygen-fed cockpit fires are deadly, and preventing them is urgent. But with evidence hidden, the full truth of Flight 804 may never be known. What do you think? Who do you think revealed the real report? The French or the Egypt? Or do you think there might be any third reason that none of them addressed? Also, why is the Egypt trying to cover up everything? Is it only their image or something more at stake? See, questions are many, but answers we don't have any. But we'd love to know what you think about all these in the comments below. And to know about more flight disasters, subscribe to this channel and follow our work. Until we meet again, fly safe.